Thanks so much for joining us. Just as a reminder, this is the FY26 HUD Continuum of Care Program Competition, How to Apply webinar. My name is Sam Shukas. I'm the Housing Community Health Program Director here at UWRC. We also have Megan Samples who will be helping with our webinar today about how we actually go ahead and apply for HUD CoC program funds. Um, Megan, if you could go to the next slide for me.
Sorry, my screen is frozen.
Awesome, thank you. So today we're going to go over an overview of what the HUD NOFO actually is. There are some new HUD priorities this year, so we will go into detail on what those are. Um, this is a process that is a part of a local competition. So in order to be considered for any of these funds, you will have to go through our local CoC competition, which will be giving details on how you do that. We will be scoring every application following our funding policies procedures. So we'll go over scoring and Megan will go over timeline and how to actually submit. If you have any questions, we have lots of space at the end. So if you could hold them, that would be great. And then we'll have open time for Q&A. Just a short disclaimer, we always put these at the beginning. We go over a high level of what the funding is. It is still imperative that you read all of the HUD NOFO in its entirety and understand what it is that you are applying for. If you are a new grantee, Megan and I are here to help you through this process and answer any questions that we can. We always like to see new grantees, but the whole process can be a little overwhelming and foreign to those who are new. But there are lots of materials posted both on our website and on the HUD Exchange, which links to all of those can be found on our funding page of the Fredericksburg Regional Continuum of Care website. So just an overview of what the HUD CoC program is. The CoC program is really designed to promote the community-wide commitment to ending homelessness. And so we do that by providing funding to nonprofits, states, Indian tribes, tribal designated housing entities, local governments, really focus on quickly rehousing homeless families and individuals, people who are fleeing domestic violence, and youth experiencing homelessness as much as we can while minimizing the trauma and dislocation caused by homelessness. So we really promote access and effective utilization of mainstream benefits and partnerships that we have in our community to be able to help us do that. Housing is just a really small part of that, but how we wrap services around folks. And we really want to optimize self-sufficiency for homeless individuals and families. And this year, HUD is really focused on making sure that everyone is aware of what self-sufficiency means. So I just included this definition from their NOFO there. Self-sufficiency is really about their ability to meet basic needs, including a place to live without public or private assistance. So we want to be able to give them a hand up and be able to get them back onto their feet in the hopes that they will be able to then take over all of their basic needs on their own without any kind of subsidy. So this is an annual award with the caveat of last year being a 2-year award. So this year, based on the estimated funding that we have, and I will just say here about these numbers, these are the best estimate that I can give at this point. Though HUD has released the Continuum of Care program NOFO, they have not provided all the details on funding and what that means for each community. And so based on what our last year numbers were and what I know about percentages that are allowable, This is so far my best guess at how much money we think we have. I give these so you get an idea of how much our community is able to apply for. It should not in any way stop you from telling me what you need for your project to be successful. So if you are going to submit a project application, I still want you to apply for everything that your application needs in order to meet the goals and objectives of the CoC program. So right now for us, we have about $640,000 um, in renewal funds. So those are funds that are already out in the community. You'll see in that second column, that's how it breaks down. We currently have an HMIS project, which is Homeless Management Information System, a permanent supportive housing project with MICA, and a rapid rehousing project for domestic violence with Empower House. So that's where that renewal funds comes from. Each year, a CoC is eligible to apply for an increase in the community award, and that is called the CoC bonus. And so that can go to any eligible project type. And this year is a little bit different. It's usually 15% of our per rata need. However, this year they set a floor for all CoCs at 500,000. So it's either 15% or 500,000, whichever is higher. So for us, our 15% is really small. And so we are at that floor. So it is the most in additional funds that we have ever been able to apply for at $500,000. In addition to general CoC bonus funds, there are additional domestic violence funds that we are able to apply for. These can still be under any project type, but it is specifically for projects that are serving domestic violence populations. So those who have already fled or are attempting to flee domestic violence. And so, again, best guess that I have based on what our last year's numbers were is I'm looking at about $165,000 in new domestic violence funding that we could apply for. And then for our community of our size, HUD always sets what our CoC planning amount is. These can only be applied for by the CoC lead, but it is 50,000 again this year. And that makes a total application of up to $1.3 million that we can apply for. Again, it is the most funds that we have ever been able to apply for in the past. Total CoC program funding nationally is set at about $4 billion. And so again, this is a competition that is happening across the country with us focusing on a local competition for how we actually distribute community given funds. Eligible project types for this year have changed slightly with some additions. So I did want to list them here for you. Permanent supportive housing and rapid rehousing continue to be eligible projects. There was a concern about whether or not there would be a permanent housing cap set on this HUD NOFO. There was not. So we are not capped at how much permanent housing we are able to apply for. So any of those projects are eligible. Transitional housing is a shelter type of housing. It is a longer stay focused on getting people ready for housing. So that is a new project type that has not been offered before through the CoC program, or hasn't been offered in a number of years. It was about 10 years ago, an eligible option, and then it got removed, and now it's back. And then the biggest expansion for this year is around support services only. So this will not include any kind of housing or tenant-based funding, but it will just be focused on case management and partnerships for services in the community that you might be offering to folks within your housing or transitional housing programs. So that can be support services only. That can be targeted to those, again, who are in your housing program. I will say if you are applying for housing dollars through this, support services is a line item within those projects. You would not have to apply for, let's say, a transitional housing project and a supportive services only project in order to provide case management to people within your transitional housing. You would apply for support services within your transitional housing project. Support services line only is only if you will not be accepting housing or tenant dollars for your shelter or for your housing project, and just asking for HUD assistance to do the support services only. Also eligible this year, which has not been a project before, is for street outreach. So if you're doing a support services for street outreach, that is now an eligible project type. And then you can do support services only for a centralized entry system. Mostly this is targeted towards the actual operation of it. Planning dollars can actually be used for developing it and designing what it looks like, but once it's to a point where it's operationalized, that's where you would use these. And then HMIS project can only be applied for by the HMIS lead. I also get a lot of questions about what's a renewal project and what's a new project. And so I want to make sure that people are aware what those are. Renewal projects are returning project requests. So if you currently have FUD funding, you're asking for that to be continued, that's your renewal project. New projects are both first-time projects or expansion projects. So if you're a renewal project and you receive $50,000, but you would like $10,000 more to expand your services, you could do a $50,000 renewal project and then a $10,000 new expansion project. So they will be separated out. And I'm happy to answer questions if someone has that about what your situation is or what that looks like. But I do sometimes get some confusion about what's new and what's renewal. Okay, so some new things that are happening this year. We talked a little bit about the new eligible project types. That's transitional housing and street outreach. You will notice that joint transitional housing and rapid rehousing was not an eligible project type. It was last year. It is not at this point. Anyone who currently has those funds is able to maintain those and renew for those, but you cannot be added as a new project. One of the biggest changes this time round is a move away from housing first and into the priority of treatment, recovery, and required services. So HUD does favor projects with on-site substance use treatment, required service participation, treatment bed capacity, and access to 24/7 detox and inpatient access. So they are looking for projects that have those embedded into their services as they're offering assistance to people who are experiencing homelessness. The other new priority is they are prioritizing new projects. This NOFO, for the first time, provides a set aside of $1.3 billion in new projects for Tier 2, with a preference for transitional housing and support services only projects. So they are prioritizing those project types and want to see increased competition and therefore setting aside funds specifically for new projects rather than renewals. Um, it has always been the case that there has been a set aside for families and children, but I do add this here because it is a little bit lower than what the current funding is at across the country. So HUD will award at least $430 million in permanent housing for families with children that are ranked, but right now across the country, there's about $900 million in permanent housing for families with children. So we have yet to see what that actually looks like, if that will mean a loss across the country. But that set aside was specifically called out where it hasn't been in the past. And then lastly, there is an expanded eligibility for permanent supportive housing. If you are on the HUD mailing list, they did send out some additional resources on this yesterday. But permanent supportive housing projects have traditionally been dedicated to chronically homeless households or designated as dedicated plus, which basically means that you serve your chronic folks that you can, and if there aren't anyone left or willing to accept those beds, you can go to the next priority. However, this year they have expanded the eligibility to serve families and individuals that have a disability or at least a child with a disability who meet the homeless definition. So a little bit more expanded. You still have to have the definition, but not necessarily the chronicity of homelessness in terms of length of time. So I give this to you as information. Again, I want to caveat to say it should not stop you for applying for what you need for your project. The HUD selection and ranking process is complicated. It's complicated for Megan and I, who've been doing this for years and actually have to submit the community application. I know it can be complicated for those who are looking to submit a project application. I want to give you as much information as possible, but again, we look to figure that out on the back end with the funding committee, and you just tell me what you need to have successful projects. But I do want to give you a little information about what this looks like. So if you're unfamiliar with the HUD CoC program, we have, for as long as I can remember, accepted all the applications. We score applications and then we rank them based on biggest priority and downward. And so once we rank all of our projects, there is cutoff lines for each tier. And so we've always had projects falling into a two-tier system. Tier one has traditionally been our automatic renewal tier. Anything that falls into tier one usually gets funded without issue, as long as it passes its threshold requirements. Traditionally, that tier has been set at 90% of our annual renewal amount. This year, it is set at 60%. That is to allow for increased competition across the country. So, communities who have really large renewal amounts will be losing a lot more money, which gives opportunity for communities across the country who may be smaller to gain some. So it's really having you compete for funds rather than just automatically getting the same amount each year. So again, that is set at 60%. For us, that amount is about $385,000. And those projects just have to pass eligibility, the quality threshold review, and the renewal threshold. And those are outlined in the NOFO, depending on what your project type is. On the scoring sheet, Megan has provided some page numbers so you can see really clearly what those thresholds are. For folks who have been doing this project for a long time, that's not usually very hard to meet, but they're outlined there for how many you have to meet depending on your project type. And so what HUD will do is they will score every CoC based on the CoC's community application. Our scores are out of 200 points. They score all the CoCs and then they rank all the CoCs and take their tier one projects from the beginning and fund those projects. They then make some selection requirements afterwards for everything that's left in tier two. So our tier two amount is what is our annual renewal amount minus our tier one amount plus our CoC bonus and plus that DD bonus. So for us, our tier two amount is about $922,000. For projects that fall into tier two, they must still pass eligibility and the threshold reviews, but they do not get ranked by just the CoC score alone. Each of those projects will get its own project score out of a 100-point score. 50 of those points is based on the CoC's overall application. 40 of those points are based on where the CoC has ranked those projects within their local ranking. And then there are 10 points based on whether or not the project is requiring service participation. So again, service requirement is not required to receive HUD funding, but it is prioritized and favored. So that's where you're going to see that you get extra points for having service participation requirements, which you can be which you can show through a service participation agreement in your projects. So they will take all of those, give them a project score, and then rank them across all other projects in the country. The only caveat I will make about this process is if you are a DV project, DV funds cannot go to a project that are not DV focused. So if you have renewal funds, we are able to reallocate funds. So if a project has been receiving HUD funding and the funding committee determines this isn't what we want to spend our community funds on, we can reallocate from one project to another. However, in the case of DV, we cannot reallocate already committed DV funds to something other than another DV project. So our hands are a little tied about that population in particular. And for the DV bonus, we cannot assign DV funds to any project that's not serving specifically DV population. So how will HUD select for the overall application once it is figured out? So the first thing that they do of that $4 billion pot is they fund every single planning application. So that is a set aside. It is not ranked. It does not affect our overall annual renewal amount. They set what it is for every CoC and give that money to those CoCs as long as they submitted the planning application. So the first thing they do with that $4 billion pot is they fund all the CoC planning applications. Then they take all the CoCs, rank them in order, and fund every project that meets threshold and eligibility that they ranked in tier one and fund all of those projects. Following that, they will look at the DV bonus. So what they will look at is if any of the ones that they've already funded in tier one were a DV new project and therefore goes into that $104 million set aside. And then they will rank all the DV projects in order until they meet that $104 million cap. At that point, any projects that were not selected for the DV bonus will be put back into the full ranking to be considered for other pots of funding. Next, they will look at permanent housing projects for families with children and make sure that they have successfully met the $430 million set aside. If they have not done that, they will then pull out all the projects that are permanent housing projects for families with children and fund in the order of their project scores until they hit that cap. Then for new projects, because new projects have a set aside this year as a priority, specifically in tier two, they will pull out all new projects in tier two and start with transitional housing and support services only projects until they meet the $1.3 billion set aside. If they are not able to do that with transitional housing and support service only projects, they will go to other types of new projects, but their priority is first on transitional housing and support services only. The very last selection is renewal projects. If you do the math on this and the $4 billion cap, it leaves very limited funding for renewal projects. We currently, at some of our advocacy agencies, are estimating only $300 million in renewal projects across the country to be left. So the odds of a renewal project that gets ranked in tier two to be selected is pretty slim. So I will throw that out there. A lot of priority placed on new projects. And as a community, a lot of strategic conversations happening about what we place in tier one as a renewal project or not. Okay. So a little bit about funding overview. If you're not familiar with the process, George Washington Regional Commission is the CoC lead agency, and we serve as the collaborative applicant. So we host the local competition. We have everyone apply for what they need. We host the funding committee that reviews them, scores them, ranks them, and then we write an application that includes that ranking and the project applications along with a pretty lengthy narrative about all the work that the CoC does throughout the year in order to get a really high performing score for a CoC across the country, across other CoCs. So all grantees have to go through a local funding process in order to be considered. There is a solo applicant process that is highlighted in the HUD NOFO this year. However, the only way to be eligible to apply as a solo applicant is to actually go through the CoC local competition and be determined that you were left out in some way. So I will make that caveat out there. If you do feel like you've been left out for some reason, you do always have the option to appeal and try to apply as a solo applicant. But through the GWRC competition and decision process is really the traditional way is how you get that in front of HUD to be considered for selection. All right, I'm going to pass it to Megan, who's going to talk a little bit about what that timeline looks like and what the process of that competition actually flows for our community.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. As Sam mentioned, we're going to kind of talk through kind of what the funding process is, the timeline. I'm going to show you guys the actual application in Good Grants and kind of walk through what that looks like, and I'll show you where all the materials are on our website. So as you can see here on the slide, this is a general overview of what the funding process looks like. You can see obviously the notice of funding applications and scoring sheets are released. You will have received them already since you're on this call, but they were released on Monday. They are also included on the website. And like I said, I'll show you guys that. But as you can see through kind of the process here, the next step, of course, is project applications being received by the deadline. We'll talk through all of those dates. The Funding and Performance Committee then reviews and scores all of the project applications, as Sam just kind of walked through what that process looks like. There's a ranking process. We'll go through the scoring sheet so you guys know exactly what they're looking for, and they're tied to specific application questions. The Funding Committee then accepts or rejects each application and determines the amount for each project that they will be accepting. Projects are then ranked in order of priority. As Sam mentioned, we're having a lot of strategic discussions around what is going into tier one, tier two, what's going to be best for our community, all of those things. And then projects, of course, are notified of their outcome. We open up the process for appeals. The appeals process, and we'll talk a little bit about this where that's linked on the website. It's really to say, did the funding committee and the CoC do their due diligence in reviewing, scoring, ranking these applications? So we'll talk a little bit about that too. And then once the appeals timeframe is closed, then the funding outcome and applications are submitted, posted to the CoC website for public review, and then going on from there. So I want to show you guys the website first, where all the materials are going to be listed. And also we'll show you all the local NOFO or Notice of Funding Opportunity that includes the timeline. We'll look at the chart and all of that stuff. So if you go to our website, fredericksburgcoc.org, here, this main screen that you're going to come to, our main page, if you go to About Work and Funding, this is where all of our funding opportunities are posted. This is where all the details from the NOFO will be contained. So you can scroll down right here in this like really bright funding announcement banner. You can see we have opened up officially the FY26 HUD CoC program application. And apologies if this screen is a little small, try to zoom in a little bit, but you have everything linked here that you would need to reference for your application. So first of all, we do include the actual HUD NOFO. So you can see here, this pulls up the documents from HUD that outline all of the program guidelines, eligibility, all of those things. So that's included here. We try to break it down for everyone to make it a little bit easier. But if you want to get really into the minutia of it, please make sure you're reviewing the NOFO as you're submitting an application. We've linked things throughout the application too to help kind of point you in the right direction. So that's listed. We also have the local notice of funding. So as Sam mentioned, this is a community-wide process where agencies in the community apply to the CoC and then we apply on behalf of the community. So this local NOFO is going to have all of the information in terms of applicant eligibility, all of the program guidelines, and those things too. So what I want to take a look at with you all here is this little timeline chart. So as you can see, and I'll make this just a little bit bigger. So in terms of the timeline, as you can see, and as we already talked about, we did release those applications on the 15th, this past Monday. We're doing our information session here. The next deadline that's really pertinent for you all as potential applicants is July 6th. That is when your project applications will be due in the Good Grants system. And so we'll talk about Good Grants, what it is, how to get in. Previous applicants will have already been enrolled in the system, but if you're interested in applying and you're not enrolled in Good Grants, it's really easy to set up a profile so then you can submit your application. From there, the next kind of deadline really is on July 20th. That's when our funding committee will review those applications. Just the very next day, applicants are notified of their ranking recommendation, the score for their application, as well as additional information about the appeals process. All appeals will be due to us here at GWRC by July 24th. And then you can see the timeline from there on the 31st. All those appeals will be reviewed if any have been received. And then agencies, of course, will be notified of any appeal committee determinations and decisions. And then August 7th, the project ranking consolidated application will be approved by the CoC board. Um, all of the kind of final decisions rise to that board level. The board really is determining that's of, same process for what our appeals is looking at. Did the funding committee do their due diligence and scoring, ranking, reviewing, asking all the right questions, making sure that that due diligence is met when they were reviewing the applications. So that is what the board is voting on. And then that very same day, we will notify applicants of the board determination. And then the final two buckets here or deadlines here included on this timetable are for us as the CoC in submitting that consolidated application. So we have everything reviewed. We release the full consolidated application for folks that want to review it, send out to the CoC membership as well as posted to our website on the 21st and give folks a couple days before we submit the final application on August 26th. So it's a pretty condensed timeline. And so we want to make sure everybody is on the same page for that. The next thing that I want to talk through, also we have this here on the screen too, slides. These are kind of the key dates for you all for as an applicant, the ones that are going to be the most applicable for you. So I want to talk a little bit too, if we go back to this website page, you also have all of the information that's contained here for the most part. Like we talked about that Good Grants platform, we have it linked here on the CoC funding page. Like I said, if you have not set up a platform, or I'm sorry, a user profile in Good Grants, please be sure to do so. All of our kind of reviewing application stuff is there. Um, Also, for applications that will be accepted into the community application, there will be a secondary component where agencies will submit the information in eSnaps, which is HUD's web-based portal. HUD has not released the full application questions in eSnaps at this time, and so we're trying to reduce the amount of work that folks have to do by doing all of the legwork in Good Grants and then hopefully make it really easy for applicants that are accepted to then just plug it into eSnaps. So that also is listed here. If you are a new applicant, you're interested in applying, it is worth setting up that eSnaps user profile early. It has to be approved by HUD, and so it can take a little bit of time. So we recommend doing that if you have not done so already. You have also instructions for completing applications linked here too, as well as the Good Grants platform link. So as we talked about that July 6th timeframe for the Good Grant submission. The next thing want to talk through with you all is the scoring sheets. So you know, as you're walking through things, exactly what the funding committee is going to be looking at. The way that we create these scoring sheets is we pull the guidelines, the eligibility, the priority points, all of those things. We go through the HUD NOFA with a fine-tooth comb, pull out all of those key priorities and pieces, and format them into something that our funding committee can use to score local applications. So as you can see here, these are linked on the website as well. You have just kind of the general instructions. And again, this is going to be for folks to review. The main kind of categories for scoring, as Sam mentioned, we do have that initial threshold review set by HUD. So as you can see here, we have applicant eligibility. These guidelines are set by HUD, and so these threshold guidelines are just pass fail. So you can see the details of the different entities that are eligible to apply. We have also linked specific information on the scoring sheet for some of these more kind of granular pieces, in particular, your project threshold eligibility, your project renewal thresholds, new project thresholds, because they're all a little bit different. So those pages are linked for this HUD NOFO for you there as well. There's also quite a bit mentioned throughout the NOFO about reasonable cost, and so that is included as well. When you're in the Good Grants platform, it has some of these definitions in place for you, so you don't have to like always be like going back and referencing the pages, but they are located here. You can see where those descriptions are included, and then also the match requirements are pass-fail as well. You then have project review. So these are broken down into a couple different categories. We have first, for all project types that are applying, we have the HUD and CoC priorities. So you can see here something that we have added this year is on the category side of things. It's shows you exactly what question in Good Grants it's referencing. So this makes it a little bit easier for our funding committee to be able to review those, but also you have that information so you know exactly how it's being scored and the amount of points that are available. We have community need, leveraging mainstream resources, leveraging system partnerships, and leveraging healthcare services. You also have some bonus points around the supportive service participation and treatment and recovery services, as Sam mentioned. HUD is highly prioritizing these projects this year, and so there are bonus points available to applicants surrounding those things. You then have scoring related to project performance and system improvement. And so this section is for all of the housing projects. Specifically, it is not for the HMIS application, but you can see here these are performance and system related questions, exits to permanent housing, jobs and income growth, returns to homelessness, length of time homeless, reduction in first-time homelessness, and cost effectiveness. And then we have some questions around budget appropriateness and system performance improvement. So the scoring sheet also dictates, you can see here kind of at the very top, whether your project type is a renewal or it's a new/expansion project. Some of these questions are not going to be relevant to a new project versus a renewal because you obviously won't have some of that data if it's a new project. So those are determined there for you. And then we also have this program operations and administration. This is again for all project types, organizational capacity, staff capacity, prior experience, and then findings for any audits or monitoring by HUD, and then spending rates. And so again, some of these are not going to be relevant if you are applying for the first time. At the bottom of the scoring sheet, you have the total breakdown of total points available on based on what project type you're applying for. And then, of course, room for feedback from the funding committee. Applicants will receive copies as well. So, kind of the bread and butter of what I want to go over with you too is the actual application, what it looks like. This is kind of the main application page for Good Grants once you're logged in. As an applicant, you might not have access to all of these, but really the main thing that we're talking about here today is this FY26 HUD COC program competition. So once you're logged in, you have a profile, you will come to this main page, you will click Start Application, and it pulls you right into the system. So Good Grants is a really easy system to navigate from the applicant side. You can download all of the application questions ahead of time. So as you can see here, this main page that it will start you at, it's going to ask you what grant you're looking at. You want to make sure that's FY26 HUD COC program application, and you can download that blank application as a PDF here too. I would recommend downloading that, reviewing the questions. What we do, we also have like a Word document where you're pulling, all that information over, and then you can copy everything over. You can save along the way as you're going through Good Grants, but it's good practice just to have that as well. You are going to name your project. So I'm just going to name test for now. You'll click save and next. And what it does, it just pulls you to the next screen. So it's kind of, you can go through those tabs. You can review all the tabs ahead of time. You don't have to go through them in order. But as you can see here, project information, it's of course going to ask you what type of application you're submitting and what project type. Um, You'll also have the questions related to just general, like kind of contact, phone number, email, those types of things. The project thresholds, this is going to be what we're going to do is we're just going to select, we're going to do a new permanent housing project just so you guys can see kind of what that looks like. So we'll do rapid rehousing and what we can do. As you can see on this project thresholds, this page has all the details that is included in the HUD NOFO that I was talking about earlier with all those project thresholds. Um, HUD is requiring that we do affirmatively certify the following. The project agrees to participate in the local HMIS system or use a comparable database. The project applicant will not engage in illegal racial discrimination, and the project applicant will not operate drug injection sites or, quote, safe consumption sites in violation of these various codes. As a note, this certification just is not a requirement that program participants must be sober in order to receive assistance through the project. But that caveat is there for you too. And those codes are available if you wanted to review them. As I mentioned that in the NOFO, they talk a lot about what reasonable cost is. And so we've included this definition for you here, just so you have it. Depending on what project type you've selected, it will then bring up the project threshold. You can see here on the right-hand side, this gives all of the detail for the project, what the threshold is in order to meet that. Your next kind of page here tab is you do have your budget. So these again, it will pull up whatever budget is appropriate for your project type that you're submitting, and you will plug in these details. That also has information for you to plug in regarding the match requirement based on your project type and the details for that as well. And then kind of the meat and potatoes of it is this general narrative tab. So this is going to have all of the information regarding your project scope, all the questions that are going to help determine the details of your project. You can see community need, federal funding need, and these are all narrative-based questions. We have an additional section for those HUD priorities. And all of those things that we went through on the scoring sheet, all of those questions are included here. You also, some of the questions, depending on if you answer yes or no to them, will prompt additional questions, in particular for some renewal things. So those are included here as well. It'll have you go through your organizational and staff capacity, all those questions that are included on those project performance. So these are all included for you here. Your next tab is your project population targets. So these have your anticipated number of households that will be served, the number of beds or units that are proposed by the project, the household type. This is all of that really granular detail of who your project is going to be serving, how many folks you're looking at, and all of that information. And then you have your project performance tab. So these ones are tied to those project performance scoring criteria on the scoring sheets, access to permanent housing, what are your strategies around that? Income growth, same types of questions, returns to homelessness, all of those performance related questions on the scoring sheet. And then again, we have this section here for cost effectiveness. You can always review that definition when you're filling that out as well. You then have this section for attachments. So HUD does require a number of um, attachments to be provided to ensure eligibility and compliance with the program. So you have policies and procedures, job descriptions, formal agreements, those types of things that you will include here. And then the last tab is just this acknowledgement tab. So that's just essentially saying the review date and acknowledging that the applicant organization will be acting as the responsible fiscal agent for any funds that may be received. You can also preview it here if you wanted to like see it all, in a this kind of format. I will say I would highly recommend downloading that as you're going through the project application. I realized that was a lot of information all at one time. So again, please feel free to reference the CoC website. It does have everything included for you here, relevant tabs, questions, and then that local notice of funding. And if anybody has any questions with getting into good grants, if you're not a current applicant, you've never applied, you want kind of a walkthrough again once you're in, we can always do that for you as well. Um, so I think that about wraps it up for timeline and what the application looks like. I think at this point we will open it up to any questions that folks have, and just any discussion that folks want to have in our last roughly 10 minutes or so. Okay. If there are no questions, Sam, any final thoughts or anything that you wanted to include outside of what we've discussed already?
Um, I will just give a plug for technical assistance, especially for those who have never applied before or have never applied through a CoC process. It can be long and tedious. Megan and I's whole role is to help make sure that you have the information that you need in order to have successful projects. Our community is a strong applicate. Has a strong application across the entire nation's competition. And so we want to be able to deliver a product to HUD that actually shows correlation with their priorities and how funds could be made, both so we can maintain our level funding, but also increase funding for our community. So please, if you have questions or a project idea, I strongly encourage you to reach out to Megan and I to talk through what that looks like, how it fits. Anything from as small as I don't know what forms I would have to fill out or how I'm thinking this, but is that a reasonable request around what my budget may be? We can help you think through what those processes look like and how that looks for the project that you have in mind. So please reach out to us. We are here to help in any way that we can through the process.
Thank
Perfect.
you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you, Sam. And also, Trayshawn, I do see your question in the chat. Yes, that's no problem. We're going to post the recording of the session to the CoC website. So no worries about the missing the front half. It'll be available for you. All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining. Really appreciate everybody's time. And if, to Sam's point, if anybody has any questions, please feel free to reach out to us, and we will make sure you have everything you need. So hope everyone has a good one. Be safe and well.
You too.
Thank you. Have a good day.